The security monitor in Catherine Monroe's private office flickered to life at exactly 9:47 on a Wednesday evening. She had stayed late again, the city lights of Seattle spreading below her like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, pulling up the camera feed from the executive medical suite on the 14th floor. She told herself it was routine, just checking in before heading home, making sure the night nurse had everything under control, making sure her son was comfortable, stable, breathing steadily through the ventilator that had kept him alive for the past 18 months. But Catherine knew the truth. She checked that camera feed 17 times a day, sometimes more. She watched her son through a screen because watching him in person had become unbearable, because sitting beside his hospital bed and seeing no response, no recognition, no flicker of the bright boy he had once been, made her chest feel like it was collapsing inward. On the monitor, she could see Ethan's room, the specialized medical bed positioned near the window. The machines clustered around him like faithful sentries, their lights blinking in steady rhythm. The IV pole, the ventilator, the feeding tube, all the equipment that kept her 12-year-old son tethered to a life he could not fully live. The night nurse should have been there. Margaret, a capable woman in her 50s who had worked for Catherine for 11 months. But Margaret's chair sat empty. The room appeared deserted except for Ethan, motionless beneath crisp white sheets. Catherine's pulse quickened. She reached for her phone, ready to call security, when movement on the screen caught her attention. A figure entered the frame from the left side. Not Margaret, someone else. Someone wearing the gray maintenance uniform that marked the building's janitorial staff. Catherine leaned closer to the monitor, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of her desk. The janitor moved toward her son's bed with quiet steps. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the medical suite, she could make out broad shoulders, dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, hands that moved with surprising gentleness as they reached toward Ethan. Catherine's breath caught. Her finger hovered over the security button that would summon help immediately. But something made her pause. Something in the way the janitor moved, not furtive or threatening, just be careful, present. The janitor pulled a chair close to Ethan's bedside and sat down. Even through the grainy camera feed, Catherine could see her son's face, so still, so pale. His eyes closed as they had been for 543 days. Since the accident that had stolen him from her, in every way except the most technical. Then the janitor began to sing. Catherine could not hear the melody through the silent security feed, but she could see the janitor's lips moving, could see the rise and fall of breath that carried music into the sterile room, could see something impossible. Ethan's fingers twitched. It was barely perceptible. Just the smallest movement of his right hand against the white sheet. But Catherine had spent 543 days watching for any sign, any response, any indication that her son was still in there somewhere. She knew that twitch was real. The janitor kept singing, one hand resting gently on Ethan's arm, and Ethan's fingers moved again, this time with more purpose, as though reaching toward something, as though hearing something that penetrated the fog where he had been lost. Catherine sat frozen in her chair, 32 floors above, watching a stranger do what dozens of specialists and therapists had failed to accomplish. Draw a response from her son. Her phone was already in her hand. She was dialing security before conscious thought caught up with action. Her voice came out sharp and cold when the guard answered. She told them there was an unauthorized person in the executive medical suite. She wanted them escorted out immediately. She wanted to know how anyone had accessed a restricted floor without proper clearance. Even as she spoke, even as she watched security guards appear on the monitor and approach the janitor, Catherine felt something twist in her chest. Something that might have been regret. or fear, or the terrible recognition that she was about to destroy the only person who had reached her son in 18 months. The janitor stood when the guards arrived, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. No resistance, no argument, just quiet compliance. The guards escorted her toward the door, and Catherine watched her son's hand fall still again, motionless, gone. Catherine closed the security feed and sat in darkness for a long time. Outside her window, Seattle gleamed with artificial light. Inside her chest, something old and familiar settled back into place. The emptiness she had learned to carry, the grief she had learned to function around, the terrible acceptance that her son was gone in every way that mattered, and nothing would bring him back. But Ethan's fingers had moved. She had seen it. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Catherine Monroe was 41 years old and had built Monroe Tech from a garage startup into a software empire worth $3.7 billion. She had 230 employees, offices in 6 countries, and a reputation for ruthless efficiency that made competitors nervous and investors confident. She had also been sleeping 4 hours a night for the past 18 months, existing on black coffee and protein bars consumed between meetings, running a company while her son lay in a specialized medical suite she had built inside her own building because she could not bear to leave him in a hospital where she was not in control. Control was everything to Catherine. It was the foundation upon which she had built her life. Control over her schedule, her company, her public image. Control over every variable she could possibly manage. She had lost control exactly once, 18 months ago, for 17 seconds. That was all it took for everything to shatter. She had been driving Ethan home from his school concert. He had played saxophone in the middle school jazz band, and she had actually made it to the performance, a rare occurrence in those days when building the company consumed most of her waking hours. Ethan had been glowing with excitement, talking non-stop about the solo he had nailed, about how his music teacher said he had real talent. Catherine had glanced down at her phone, just for a second, just to check an urgent message from her VP of operations about a server crisis that could cost them a major contract. 17 seconds. That was how long her eyes left the road. That was how long it took for the truck to run the red light. How long before the impact sent her car spinning. How long before her world ended and this new, terrible reality began. Catherine had walked away with a broken wrist and 3 cracked ribs. Ethan had suffered a traumatic brain injury that left him in a coma. The doctors said he might wake up. They used words like potential and possibility and time will tell. 18 months later, he still had not opened his eyes. Catherine had built the medical suite on the 14th floor of Monroe Tech headquarters 6 months after the accident. She had hired the best doctors money could buy, installed state-of-the-art equipment, and created a space where she could be close to Ethan while still running her company, where she could check on him between meetings, where she could maintain the illusion that she was handling everything. The truth was, she was barely holding on. The company saw a composed CEO who never missed a deadline. Her employees saw a demanding boss who expected perfection. Her ex-husband saw a woman too proud to admit she needed help. Nobody saw the person who sat alone in her office at night, watching security footage of her son, looking for signs of life that never came. Nobody saw her hands shake when she signed medical consent forms. Nobody saw the way she had to steel herself before entering Ethan's room, bracing against the pain of seeing him so still, so absent. Until tonight, when a janitor she had never noticed had somehow reached through the distance that separated Catherine from her son and drawn a response from him. Catherine looked up the janitorial schedule on her computer. The building contracted with an outside cleaning service. She pulled up their records, scanning through employee lists until she found the name assigned to her floor. Riley Santos, 33 years old, employed by Cleantech Services for 7 months. Before that, a gap in employment history stretching back 3 years. Before the gap, Catherine found something that made her pause. Riley Santos had been a registered music therapist, licensed and certified, working at Seattle Children's Hospital in their pediatric rehabilitation unit. Catherine sat back in her chair, pieces beginning to fit together in ways she did not fully understand. A music therapist working as a janitor. Why? What happened in those 3 missing years? And more importantly, what was Riley Santos doing in Ethan's room? The next morning, Catherine arrived at her office at 6:30, earlier than usual. She made calls to the cleaning company, demanding information. She reviewed security footage from the past week, watching Riley's movements through the building. What she found surprised her. Riley did not just clean. She moved through the building with quiet purpose, but Catherine began to notice patterns. The way Riley paused outside the medical suite during her evening rounds. The way she would stand in the doorway for a moment, looking in. Never entering, just watching. Until last night, when Margaret, the night nurse, had stepped away for her break. When the room was empty, when Riley had finally crossed that threshold. Catherine pulled up more footage. She watched Riley work, the efficient way she moved through her cleaning routine, the careful attention she paid to every detail. There was something almost meditative in the way Riley mopped floors, wiped down surfaces, emptied trash bins, as though she was not just cleaning a building but performing some kind of ritual. Catherine's assistant knocked on her door at 8:15. Amanda, efficient and unflappable, carrying the morning schedule and a large coffee. Amanda mentioned there was a woman waiting in the lobby, one of the cleaning staff. She had been there since 7 and said she would not leave until she spoke with Catherine. Catherine looked up sharply. She asked if the woman had given a name. Amanda checked her notes. Riley Santos. Catherine stood. She told Amanda to have security bring Riley up. Then she changed her mind. She would go down herself. In the elevator, descending toward the lobby, Catherine tried to organize her thoughts. She had planned to call Riley in for a formal meeting, to demand answers in her own space, on her own terms, where she held all the power. But Riley had come here on her own, had waited for hours, had refused to leave. That spoke to something Catherine recognized: determination, stubbornness, the refusal to be dismissed. The lobby of Monroe Tech was designed to impress. Soaring ceilings, walls of glass, sleek furniture in shades of gray and chrome. Riley sat on one of the modern couches near the security desk, still wearing her gray uniform, hair pulled back in the same neat ponytail. She looked small in the vast space, but she sat with her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. When Catherine stepped out of the elevator, Riley stood. Their eyes met across the lobby, and Catherine saw something in Riley's face that caught her off guard. Not fear, not defensiveness, just a calm readiness, as though Riley had been preparing for this confrontation and was not going to back down. Catherine walked across the lobby, her heels clicking against polished marble. She stopped a few feet away from Riley, maintaining the distance that marked their different places in the world's hierarchy. Catherine asked why Riley was in her son's room last night. Riley met her gaze steadily. She said Ethan needed someone to sing to him. The simplicity of the statement, the quiet certainty in Riley's voice, threw Catherine off balance. She had expected excuses, justifications, apologies, not this direct acknowledgement. Catherine's voice turned cold. She said Ethan had doctors, nurses, therapists. He did not need a janitor who had no authorization to be in his room. Riley nodded slowly. She said Catherine was right about the authorization. She said she should not have been there without permission. But then she said something that made Catherine's carefully constructed composure crack. Riley said Ethan responded to the music. She said his vitals improved, his breathing deepened, and his fingers moved. She said she had worked with dozens of brain injury patients during her years as a music therapist, and she recognized the signs of neural response. Catherine stared at this woman in a janitor's uniform who spoke with the confidence of a medical professional. She asked why a music therapist was cleaning floors. For the first time, something shifted in Riley's expression. A shadow passed across her face. She said that was a long story, and Catherine probably did not want to hear it. Catherine surprised herself. She said she had time. Riley glanced around the lobby, at the security guards watching them, at the employees beginning to arrive for the workday, at the glass walls that offered no privacy. Riley said if Catherine really wanted to know, they should probably talk somewhere more private. Catherine made a decision that went against every instinct she had built. Over 18 months of maintaining absolute control. She told Riley to follow her. They rode the elevator in silence. Catherine was aware of the eyes of employees who got on and off at various floors, taking in the sight of their CEO standing next to a cleaning person in a maintenance uniform. She was aware of the questions this would raise, the rumors that would spread. She did not care. For the first time in 18 months, something mattered more than maintaining appearances. She needed to understand what Riley had done to reach Ethan when nobody else could. In her office, Catherine gestured to one of the chairs facing her desk. Riley sat, and Catherine took her usual position of power on the other side. But sitting there, looking at Riley's calm, weathered face, Catherine felt the power dynamic shift in ways she could not quite name. Catherine asked Riley to explain everything, starting with why she was working as a janitor when she had been a music therapist. Riley was quiet for a moment. Then she began to speak, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of old pain. She said she had been a music therapist at Seattle Children's Hospital for 8 years. She said she loved the work, loved seeing kids heal through music, loved being part of their recovery. She said she specialized in working with traumatic brain injuries and neurological disorders. 3 years ago, she was working with a patient, a 9-year-old girl named Maya, who had been in a car accident. Severe brain trauma. The doctors were not optimistic. Riley said she started music therapy sessions with Maya, gentle work, just singing, playing soft guitar, watching for any sign of response. After 6 weeks, Maya's parents wanted to remove life support. They said it had been long enough. They said Maya was not coming back. The doctors agreed. Riley said she fought them. She said Maya was showing subtle signs of awareness, small responses that the medical staff dismissed as reflexes. She said Maya needed more time. She begged the family to wait. They did not listen. They removed life support. Maya died that afternoon. Riley's voice remained steady, but Catherine saw her hands tighten in her lap. Riley said she had been wrong. She had seen signs that were not there, had let her hope and her belief in her methods cloud her professional judgment. She had pushed a grieving family to prolong their daughter's suffering based on nothing more than wishful thinking. She said Maya's father filed a formal complaint against her. An investigation found that Riley had overstepped professional boundaries, had made claims about patient response that were not supported by medical evidence. Her license was suspended. During the suspension, Riley lost her job. She could not find work in her field. Her savings ran out. She started cleaning buildings to pay rent, to survive, to have something to do while she tried to rebuild a life that felt completely destroyed. She said the suspension was lifted 6 months ago. She could practice music therapy again if she wanted to. But she had not gone back. She was not sure she trusted herself anymore. Catherine listened to Riley's story and saw something she recognized. Guilt, self-blame, the terrible weight of responsibility for a life you could not save. Catherine told Riley about the accident. About 17 seconds later, she looked away from the road. about Ethan lying in a coma while she ran a company and pretended she was fine, about the security cameras she watched obsessively because she could not save her son, but at least she could keep watching him. She told Riley things she had never said out loud, about the crushing weight of guilt, about the way every breath felt like a betrayal because she was alive and healthy, while Ethan was trapped in a body that did not respond, about the nights she sat alone in her office and wondered if she should let him go. When she finished, the silence between them felt different, not the silence of strangers, but the silence of two people who had both been broken by circumstances beyond their control and were still trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Riley spoke first. She said Ethan had responded last night. She said it was not wishful thinking. His fingers had moved deliberately, repeatedly, in rhythm with the music. His breathing had synchronized. His heart rate had stabilized in ways that suggested conscious processing, not just reflex. Catherine wanted to believe her. God, how she wanted to believe. But she had spent 18 months learning not to hope. Hope hurt too much when it was disappointed. Riley seemed to understand Catherine's hesitation. She leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Riley said she understood why Catherine would doubt her. She said she had been wrong before, had let her hope blind her to reality, but she said this was different. She said she had spent 3 years learning to see more clearly, to separate what she wanted to see from what was actually there. She said if Catherine would allow it, she would work with Ethan. Formal music therapy sessions, documented responses, medical oversight, everything done by the book with proper authorization and professional standards. She said she was not asking Catherine to hope. She was just asking for permission to try. Catherine looked at Riley Santos, a music therapist who cleaned floors, who had lost everything because she cared too much, who had every reason to walk away from cases like Ethan's, but had instead snuck into his room at night to sing to him anyway. Catherine made another decision that went against every instinct. She said yes. The paperwork took 3 days to process. Catherine insisted on doing everything properly this time. She contacted the state medical board, verified Riley's credentials, had her attorney draft a formal contract, and scheduled consultations with Ethan's primary neurologist. Dr. Patricia Chen was skeptical. She sat in Catherine's office reviewing Riley's proposed treatment plan with the careful scrutiny of someone who had seen too many desperate families chase false hope. Dr. Chen said music therapy had shown some promise in brain injury rehabilitation, but she said Catherine needed to understand that any response from Ethan would likely be involuntary. Reflexive movements did not indicate consciousness or awareness. Catherine asked if Dr. Chen had watched the security footage she had sent over, the footage of Ethan's fingers moving in rhythm with Riley's singing, moving repeatedly, moving with what looked like intention. Dr. Chen admitted she had watched it. She said it was interesting, but she cautioned against reading too much into a brief video clip. She said the brain was complex, and apparent responses could be deceiving. Catherine felt the familiar weight of disappointment settling over her, another expert telling her not to hope, another professional offering caution instead of possibility. Then Dr. Chen surprised her. She said that despite her reservations, she saw no harm in allowing the music therapy sessions to proceed. She said if Riley followed proper protocols and documented everything carefully, it could provide valuable data. And if there was even a small chance it might benefit Ethan, it was worth trying. Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. Permission. Not enthusiasm, not confidence, but permission to try. Sometimes that was enough. Riley started the following Monday. She arrived at 6 in the evening after finishing her regular cleaning shift. Catherine had offered to hire her full-time as Ethan's music therapist, but Riley had declined. She said she wanted to keep the cleaning job. She said she needed the humility of that work, needed the reminder of what she had lost and why professional boundaries mattered. Catherine understood that in a way she had not expected to. Riley was not just protecting herself. She was honoring the mistake that had cost her everything. The first formal session, Catherine watched from her office via the security feed. She told herself it was professional oversight, medical monitoring, but really she was terrified. Terrified that the response she had seen that night had been a fluke. Terrified that Riley would try and fail and Catherine would have to accept once again that her son was unreachable. Riley entered the medical suite carrying a guitar case. She had changed out of her maintenance uniform into casual clothes, jeans and a soft blue sweater. She looked different, more like herself, perhaps. Less like someone trying to be invisible. She set up a chair beside Ethan's bed and spent several minutes just sitting quietly, not doing anything, just being present. Catherine watched her son's still face, the closed eyes, the slack features that no longer resembled the animated boy who had talked non-stop about jazz music and saxophone techniques. Finally, Riley picked up her guitar. She tuned it carefully, testing each string. Then she began to play, something slow and gentle. A melody Catherine did not recognize, but that felt instantly familiar, like something remembered from childhood, like safety. Riley began to sing. Her voice was clear and true, not professionally trained but honest, the kind of voice that carried emotion more than technical perfection. Catherine watched Ethan's face on the monitor. At first, nothing. Just the same terrible stillness that had defined the past 18 months. But then, so gradually, Catherine almost missed it. Something changed. Ethan's breathing pattern shifted. The ventilator measured every breath, and Catherine could see the numbers on the display adjusting. His respirations were slowing, deepening, synchronizing with the rhythm of Riley's music. Then his right hand moved. Not a twitch this time. A deliberate curl of his fingers, as though he was trying to grasp something just out of reach. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. She watched as Riley noticed the movement too. Riley did not stop singing, did not break the flow of music, but her left hand moved to rest gently on Ethan's arm, grounding him, letting him know someone was there. Ethan's fingers curled tighter. Riley continued playing for another 20 minutes. Throughout the session, Ethan showed consistent responses. His heart rate stabilized at a lower, healthier rhythm. His muscle tension decreased visibly, and twice more, his fingers moved. When Riley finally set down her guitar, she sat for several more minutes in silence, just being with Ethan, not demanding anything from him, not celebrating the responses or pushing for more, just acknowledging what had happened with quiet respect. Catherine found herself standing without consciously deciding to move. She left her office and took the elevator down to the 14th floor. She had not been in Ethan's room in 3 days. She usually could not manage more than brief visits, quick checks before the pain of seeing him drove her away. But now she walked through the door and saw Riley packing up her guitar. Riley looked up, clearly surprised to see Catherine. Catherine asked if it always happened like that. The responses, the changes. Riley shook her head. She said every session was different. Sometimes patients responded strongly. Sometimes they showed nothing at all. The key was consistency and patience, building a relationship through music over time. Catherine walked closer to Ethan's bed. She looked at her son's face, searching for some sign of the changes she had witnessed on the monitor. But Ethan looked the same as always, still, absent, gone. She asked Riley how she knew what to play, what songs to choose, what would reach someone trapped so far inside themselves. Riley sat back down. She said it was partly instinct, partly training, partly trial and error. She said she listened to Ethan's breathing, watched his subtle physical cues, felt for what kind of energy he needed. Sometimes patients responded to songs from their past, music that held memories. Sometimes they needed something new, something without associations, just pure sound and emotion. Catherine found herself sitting in the chair on the other side of Ethan's bed, the chair she had occupied countless times, holding her son's unresponsive hand and feeling utterly helpless. She told Riley about Ethan before the accident, about his love for music, his saxophone playing, the jazz standards he used to practice until she begged him to take a break. She told Riley about the concert the night of the accident, about Ethan's excitement, about how proud he had been. She said she had not been able to listen to music since then, could not bear the reminder of what they had lost. Riley listened without interrupting. When Catherine finished, Riley asked a question that caught her off guard. Riley asked if Catherine blamed herself for the accident. Catherine's carefully maintained composure cracked. She said, of course, she blamed herself. She had been driving. She had looked away. 17 seconds of distraction that destroyed her son's life. Riley's voice was gentle but firm. She said 17 seconds of distraction happened to everyone. She said the truck that ran the red light bore responsibility too. She said accidents were called accidents because they were not intentional, because sometimes terrible things happened despite everyone's best efforts. Catherine felt tears burning behind her eyes. She said intentions did not matter, results did. And the result was Ethan lying here, trapped because she had failed to protect him. Riley reached across Ethan's bed and did something unexpected. She took Catherine's hand. Riley said she understood guilt. She said she had carried it for 3 years, heavy enough to crush her. She said guilt made you think you deserved to suffer, made you think suffering was somehow payment for what you had done wrong. She said it took her a long time to learn that guilt was not the same as accountability. Accountability meant acknowledging mistakes and doing better. Guilt just meant drowning in pain that changed nothing and helped no one. She said Catherine was accountable to Ethan, responsible for his care, his treatment, his future. But she was not required to suffer endlessly as payment for an accident. Catherine looked at Riley and saw someone who had traveled this dark road ahead of her, someone who had found a way through, even if the journey left scars. Catherine asked Riley what changed for her, what made her able to try again after losing everything. Riley glanced down at Ethan. She said she had a daughter, Sophie, 8 years old. She said watching Sophie grow up had taught her something important. Children did not need perfect parents. They needed presence, ones who showed up even when they were scared, even when they had failed before, even when success was not guaranteed. She said she could not change what happened with Maya, could not undo her mistakes, but she could learn from them. She could be more careful, more humble, more willing to acknowledge uncertainty. And she could use what she had learned to help other families if they would let her. Catherine felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. Not hope, exactly, but something adjacent to it. Possibility. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The sessions became routine over the following weeks. Riley came every evening at 6. She played for Ethan, sang to him, talked to him in the quiet voice of someone who believed he could hear her, even if he could not respond. And Ethan did respond, not dramatically, not with the sudden awakening Catherine secretly hoped for every time she watched the monitor, but consistently. His fingers moved more frequently. His breathing patterns showed clear synchronization with the music. His heart rate and blood pressure improved during and after sessions. Dr. Chen reviewed the data with growing interest. She admitted the responses were more significant than she had initially expected. She said while they still could not confirm consciousness, the consistent patterns suggested some level of neural processing was occurring. She said it was worth continuing. Catherine started attending the sessions in person. At first, she stood near the door, maintaining distance. But gradually she moved closer, sat in the corner, then in a chair beside Riley, then on the other side of Ethan's bed, close enough to hold his hand while Riley played. Being in the room changed everything. Watching on a monitor, Catherine had been able to maintain clinical detachment, but sitting beside her son, feeling the warmth of his skin, seeing the subtle changes in his expression as music filled the room, she could not hide behind professional observation. She had to feel it, the pain, the hope, the terrible fear that this might lead nowhere, the fragile possibility that it might lead somewhere after all. One evening, 3 weeks into regular sessions, Catherine arrived at the medical suite to find Riley already there, but not playing. Riley sat beside Ethan's bed, talking softly. Catherine paused in the doorway, listening. Riley was telling Ethan about Sophie, about her daughter's latest adventure at school, about the spelling test Sophie had aced, the art project she had created with fierce concentration, the imaginary friend she had invented, who apparently had very strong opinions about breakfast cereal. Riley's voice carried such warmth, such ordinary parental affection, that Catherine felt a sharp pang of loss. She used to talk to Ethan like that, about his day, his friends, his dreams, before the accident, before everything became about medical charts and treatment plans and desperate hope. Riley noticed Catherine in the doorway and smiled. She said she was just catching Ethan up on the important news. She said even if he could not respond, he deserved to know what was happening in the world beyond this room. Catherine walked in and sat down. She asked Riley if Sophie knew what her mother did, if she understood that Riley worked as a janitor because of what happened with Maya. Riley nodded. She said Sophie knew everything. She said she had been honest with her daughter from the beginning. She said Sophie had been 5 when Riley lost her license, old enough to sense something was wrong, but too young to fully understand. Riley said she had explained it in simple terms. Mommy made a mistake at work, a big mistake that hurt a family who was already hurting. And now Mommy had to find a different job while she learned how to be better. She said Sophie had asked if Riley was a bad person, and Riley had told her no. She said good people could make bad mistakes. The important thing was learning from them and trying to help others in the future. Catherine felt something twist in her chest. She said she had never told Ethan the truth about the accident. She said he had never woken up to hear it. But even before, even in those last hours of consciousness, she had not been able to say the words. I looked away. I caused this. Riley was quiet for a moment. Then she said, maybe someday Catherine would get the chance. Maybe someday Ethan would wake up, and they could have that conversation. And maybe he would understand what Catherine was only beginning to learn herself. That love was not about perfection. It was about presence, about showing up even when you had failed, about trying again even when you had every reason to give up. Catherine looked at her son's still face. She said she did not know how to do that, did not know how to be present when presence meant confronting her guilt every single day. Riley reached over and took Catherine's hand. She said that was exactly why Catherine needed to practice. She said sitting here beside Ethan, even when it hurt, even when nothing changed, that was presence, that was love. She said Catherine had been watching through cameras for 18 months. Maybe it was time to start living through her actual eyes. That night, after Riley left, Catherine stayed in Ethan's room. She dimmed the lights and sat in the chair beside his bed, holding his hand. She talked to him the way Riley had talked to him, about ordinary things, about the company, about the latest software update, about the terrible coffee in the break room that people complained about constantly. She told him about Riley, about the music therapy sessions, about how his fingers were moving and his breathing was changing. She told him she did not know if it meant he was coming back, or if these were just reflexes that signified nothing. But she said she was going to keep trying, keep showing up, keep hoping even though hope was terrifying. She said she was sorry for looking away, sorry for the accident, sorry for not being able to fix what she had broken. And then, so quietly, she almost missed it. She felt something. Pressure. The faintest squeeze of her hand. Catherine went absolutely still. Her heart hammered in her chest. She waited, barely breathing, wondering if she had imagined it, wondering if her desperate need had created sensation where none existed. Then it happened again. Stronger this time. Ethan's fingers curled around hers with unmistakable intention. Catherine's breath came out in a sob. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against their joined hands, and let herself cry. Not the controlled, silent tears she usually allowed herself, but full, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere so deep she had forgotten it existed. She cried for 18 months, holding everything together. For 17 seconds, that changed everything. For the son she had lost and the mother she had failed to be. And she cried because Ethan had squeezed her hand, because he was still in there somewhere. Because Riley Santos, a janitor with a broken career and a heart big enough to try again, had found a way to reach him. When she finally looked up, she saw Riley standing in the doorway. Riley must have forgotten something, come back to retrieve it. She stood there now, watching Catherine with an expression that held no judgment, just understanding. Riley asked if Catherine was okay. Catherine laughed through her tears. She said Ethan squeezed her hand. She said it happened twice. She said she did not know if it meant anything or if it was just reflex, but she did not care because for 17 seconds, no wait, she was done with 17 seconds. She said for this moment right now, she felt connected to her son again, and that was enough. Riley walked over and knelt beside Catherine's chair. She looked at Ethan's face, at his closed eyes, at the peaceful expression that had replaced the terrible tension he used to carry. Riley said she thought it meant something. She said the brain was capable of remarkable things. She said music created pathways, connections that persisted even when other functions were damaged. She said every response built on the last one, creating networks that could eventually lead somewhere new. She said she could not promise Ethan would wake up, could not guarantee any outcome, but she could promise that what they were doing mattered, that every session, every moment of connection was building something, creating possibilities that had not existed before. Catherine looked at Riley and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in 18 months. Gratitude. Not for hope or promises or miracle cures, just for this. For someone who showed up every evening and played music for her son. For someone who understood guilt and failure and still chose to try anyway. She asked Riley if she would like to stay for a while. Maybe have coffee. Maybe talk about something other than brain injuries and therapy protocols. Riley smiled. She said she would like that very much. They went to Catherine's office. Catherine made coffee in the expensive machine she rarely used, and they sat on the couch by the window overlooking the city. For the first time since they had met, they talked not as the patient's mother and therapist, but as two women who had survived things that should have broken them. Riley told Catherine about Sophie's father, a relationship that had fallen apart under the weight of Riley's grief and guilt after losing her license. She said he had tried to support her, but she had pushed him away, convinced she did not deserve help or comfort. She said he had Sophie most weekends now, that the arrangement worked for them, even if it was not what Riley had envisioned for her family. She said she was learning that sometimes life gave you paths you never would have chosen. and the only thing to do was walk them with as much grace as possible. Catherine told Riley about her ex-husband, Marcus, about how their marriage had been fragile even before the accident, about how grief had shattered what little remained. She said Marcus visited Ethan once a month, usually on court-mandated days. She said he had moved on, remarried, started over with someone new. She said she did not blame him. She said not everyone could live in the space between loss and hope. Some people needed certainty, needed to either grieve completely or move forward completely. She said she was learning she was not that kind of person. She was the kind who lived in the uncertain middle, never fully accepting loss, but never fully believing in recovery either. Riley said maybe that was exactly where Catherine needed to be, right in the middle, present with whatever was happening rather than racing toward some imagined ending. They talked until late into the night, about their children, their failures, their fears, about the ways they had tried to protect themselves from more pain and how those protections had become prisons. When Riley finally left, Catherine stood at the window of her office and watched the city lights blur through unexpected tears. She realized she had just had the first real conversation she'd had with anyone in 18 months. The first time she had let someone see her, not as the composed CEO or the tragic mother, but as a person, flawed, frightened, and still figuring out how to survive. She pulled up the security feed from Ethan's room. Force of habit. But instead of just watching, she made a decision. She closed the laptop. Tomorrow she would be present in person. She would sit beside her son without the buffer of a screen. She would feel whatever came, hope or disappointment, progress or stagnation. She would stop watching from a distance and start living up close, where things hurt more but mattered more too. Riley Santos had taught her that, not through therapy protocols or professional expertise, but through the simple act of showing up every evening, despite past failures, despite uncertain outcomes, and trying anyway. Catherine thought maybe that was what courage looked like, not the absence of fear, but the choice to keep going even when fear was all you had. The threat came from a direction Catherine had not anticipated, not from medical complications or failed therapy, but from Marcus. Her ex-husband showed up at Monroe Tech unannounced on a Thursday afternoon, dressed in the expensive suit that marked him as part of the world Catherine had built her life in. The world where money solved problems and power protected you from consequences. Marcus walked past her assistant, without waiting for permission, and entered Catherine's office with the confident stride of someone who had every right to be there. Even though their divorce had been finalized 2 years ago, even though he had signed away most of his parental rights in exchange for a generous financial settlement. Catherine looked up from her laptop, her expression carefully neutral. She asked what he wanted. Marcus said he had been hearing interesting things. Rumors circulating among the medical professionals who occasionally checked on Ethan. He said people were talking about the unconventional therapy Catherine had approved, about a music therapist with a suspended license, about responses that might or might not be real. Catherine's blood ran cold. She asked who had been talking to him. Marcus smiled. Not warmly. He said it did not matter. What mattered was that he had looked into Riley Santos. He said he had hired a private investigator, and what he found was concerning. A therapist who had lost her license due to professional negligence, who had pushed a family to continue life support based on false evidence, who had caused additional suffering to grieving parents. He said that the therapist was now working with their son, unsupervised, using methods that were not approved by Ethan's primary care team. Catherine stood up, her hands flat on her desk. She said everything was approved. Dr. Chen had reviewed the treatment plan. Riley's license had been reinstated. Every session was documented and monitored. Marcus leaned forward. He said documentation did not matter if the therapy was based on wishful thinking rather than medical evidence. He said he had spoken with his attorney. If Catherine continued allowing Riley to treat Ethan, he would file for emergency custody modification. He would argue that Catherine's judgment was compromised by desperation, that she was allowing their son to be used as an experiment by someone with a history of poor clinical decisions. Catherine felt rage building in her chest. She asked Marcus when he had started caring about Ethan's treatment. She said he visited once a month at most. He had moved on with his life while she sat beside their son every single day. Marcus's expression hardened. He said he cared enough to protect Ethan from false hope and exploitation. He said if Catherine did not terminate Riley's therapy immediately, he would take her to court. And this time, he would win custody. He would move Ethan to a facility where real doctors could care for him properly. After Marcus left, Catherine sat in her office for a long time. The city sprawled below her, indifferent to the crisis unfolding 32 floors above. She thought about losing Ethan, not to death or permanent unconsciousness, but to a custody battle, to a system that would put him in a facility where he would be one case among hundreds, where nobody would sit with him every evening and play music, where he would be maintained but not reached. She thought about Riley, about the progress they had made, about Ethan's fingers squeezing her hand, about the way his breathing changed when music filled the room. She thought about what Marcus had said, false hope, exploitation, wishful thinking, and she thought about Maya, the 9-year-old girl Riley had fought for, the girl who had died anyway, the mistake that had cost Riley everything. What if Marcus was right? What if Catherine was so desperate for any sign of progress that she was seeing things that were not there? What if she was letting Riley repeat the same mistake, but this time with Catherine's own son? That evening when Riley arrived for their session, Catherine was waiting in Ethan's room. Riley noticed immediately that something was wrong. She asked if Catherine was okay. Catherine told her about Marcus, about the threat of a custody battle, about the investigation into Riley's past. She watched Riley's face as she spoke, watched the way color drained from her cheeks, the way her hands tightened on her guitar case. Riley set down the case carefully. She said she understood. She said if her presence was putting Ethan at risk, she would step away. She said she never wanted to cause more pain for Catherine's family. Catherine heard the words, but also heard what Riley was not saying. The resignation, the acceptance of loss, the familiar pattern of walking away before she could be pushed out. Catherine found herself angry, not at Riley, at Marcus, at a system that punished people for caring too much, at a world that demanded perfection and offered no space for redemption. She said Riley was not walking away, not this time. Riley looked at her with confusion and something that might have been hope. She said Catherine could lose custody. Marcus had resources, attorneys, the ability to make this battle long and expensive. Catherine said she knew. She said she had spent 18 months trying to control everything, trying to protect Ethan by managing every variable. But control had not brought him back, had not reached him the way Riley's music had. She said if Marcus wanted a fight, he would get one. She would hire her own attorneys. She would document every response, every improvement, every moment of connection. She would bring in Dr. Chen as an expert witness. She would prove that Riley's therapy was not exploitation but the best chance Ethan had. She said she was done making decisions out of fear, done choosing safety over possibility, done letting people like Marcus define what was acceptable and what was too risky. Riley sat down slowly. She said Catherine needed to understand what she was choosing. She said the custody battle would be brutal. Marcus would drag up every detail of Riley's past. He would paint Catherine as a desperate mother making reckless choices. He would argue that Ethan's best interests were being sacrificed for Catherine's need to believe in miracles. Catherine said she understood all of that, and she was choosing it anyway, because for the first time in 18 months, her son had responded to something, had shown signs of being present, had squeezed her hand with intention. She said she would not abandon that possibility just because the path forward was difficult. Riley's eyes filled with tears. She said she would do everything she could to help, document everything carefully, bring in additional professionals to verify her findings. Whatever was needed to prove the therapy was working. Catherine took Riley's hand. She said they would do this together. The next morning, Catherine called an emergency meeting with Dr. Chen. She explained the situation with Marcus, the threat of the custody battle, the need for ironclad documentation of Ethan's progress. Dr. Chen listened carefully. Then she said something that surprised Catherine. She said the responses they had been seeing were consistent with emerging consciousness. She said while she could not guarantee Ethan would fully recover, the patterns suggested neural activity that went beyond simple reflexes. She said she would testify to that if needed. Catherine felt something loosen in her chest. Validation from a doctor she trusted. Evidence that what she had been seeing was not just desperate hope. Dr. Chen continued. She said, however, Catherine needed to be prepared. She said emerging consciousness did not mean Ethan would wake up completely or quickly. The process could take months or years. He might regain some function and plateau. He might have cognitive or physical limitations that would require lifetime care. She said the question Catherine needed to answer was not whether the therapy was working. The question was whether Catherine could live in uncertainty long enough to see where it led. Catherine thought about that, about 18 months of living in the terrible space between hope and grief, about watching Ethan through cameras because being present hurt too much, about all the ways she had tried to shortcut the pain and found herself more isolated instead. She said she had been trying to avoid uncertainty, trying to control outcomes, but uncertainty was all she had, all any of them had. She said she was ready to stop running from it. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Catherine hired the best family attorney in Seattle, a woman named Janet Torres, who specialized in complex medical cases. Janet reviewed all the documentation with the precision of a surgeon. She told Catherine the case was winnable, but not guaranteed. She said judges were conservative when it came to children with severe medical needs. They prioritized stability and established medical protocols. Riley's history would be a problem. Marcus's attorneys would use it to paint a picture of recklessness. Janet said their best strategy was to focus on results, to show clear, documented improvement in Ethan's condition, to bring in expert witnesses who could testify that the music therapy was medically sound and producing measurable benefits. She asked if they had any dramatic breakthroughs that could demonstrate progress definitively. Catherine said they had small, consistent responses, finger movements, breathing changes, one-hand squeeze, all documented on video and in medical charts. Janet said that might not be enough. She said Marcus's attorneys would argue those responses were involuntary. They needed something more significant, something undeniable. Catherine went to Riley and explained what they needed. More evidence, stronger responses, something that could not be dismissed as reflex or coincidence. Riley was quiet for a long time. Then she said she had an idea. It was risky, it might not work, but if it did, it would provide exactly the kind of evidence they needed. She said she wanted to try bringing Ethan out of the medical suite, to take him somewhere different, somewhere with natural acoustics and open space. She said sometimes patients responded more strongly in environments that did not feel clinical. Catherine asked where Riley was thinking. Riley said there was a small amphitheater in a park downtown, public space, open air. She said if they brought Ethan there, brought proper medical equipment and supervision, she could play for him in a setting that felt more alive, more connected to the world outside hospital rooms and rehabilitation facilities. She said music worked best when it existed in context, when it was part of life rather than isolated from it. Catherine thought about the risks. Moving Ethan from the controlled environment of the medical suite, exposing him to weather, to public space, to variables she could not manage. Every instinct she had screamed against it, but she had promised herself she was done making decisions out of fear. She said yes. They planned it carefully. Dr. Chen agreed to supervise. They arranged for a medical transport van equipped with all necessary life support equipment. They chose a weekday afternoon when the park would be relatively quiet. They obtained permits and ensured emergency services were on standby. The day arrived with clear skies and gentle warmth. Early autumn in Seattle, the kind of day that felt like a gift. Catherine rode in the transport van with Ethan, watching his still face as they drove through the city. She had not taken him outside the building in 18 months, had kept him contained in the medical suite where she could control everything. Now she was bringing him into the world, into uncertainty, into possibility. They set up in the small amphitheater, a curved stone structure with natural acoustics, surrounded by trees that filtered sunlight into dancing patterns. Dr. Chen checked all of Ethan's vital signs. Everything is stable, everything as expected. Riley set up her equipment, not just guitar this time. She had brought a small portable keyboard, a loop pedal, and additional instruments. She said if they were going to do this, they would do it fully, create an experience that demands attention. A small crowd gathered, people walking through the park, curious about the setup. Catherine felt exposed, vulnerable. Her son is on display. Her desperate hope was visible to strangers. But she did not ask them to leave. She let them stay, let them witness whatever was about to happen. Riley began to play. She started with the gentle melodies Ethan knew, the songs from their evening sessions, building familiarity, creating safety. Then gradually she expanded, added layers, built complexity, used the natural acoustics of the space to create sound that surrounded them from all directions. She sang words Catherine recognized, a jazz standard, one of the pieces Ethan had played with his school band, the night of the concert, the night of the accident. Catherine felt her throat close. She wanted to tell Riley to stop, to choose something else, something without such painful associations. But then she saw Ethan's face, and something was different. His eyes were moving beneath closed lids. Rapid movement, the kind that suggested dreaming, consciousness processing. His breathing changed, not the synchronized pattern they had seen before, something more variable, more active, as though he was responding not just to rhythm but to meaning. His right hand moved, not a small curl of fingers, but a full movement, reaching, searching. Catherine grabbed his hand without thinking, and Ethan's fingers closed around hers, tight, unmistakable, present. Riley kept playing, her voice steady, even though Catherine could see tears streaming down her face. The music swelled through the amphitheater, and Ethan's grip tightened further. Then, so quietly, Catherine almost missed it beneath the music. Ethan made a sound. Not words, just a vocalization, a hum that matched the melody Riley was playing. Dr. Chen moved forward immediately, checking responses, verifying what they were seeing. She looked at Catherine with an expression that mixed professional restraint with genuine amazement. She said Ethan was showing voluntary motor control and vocal response. She said this was significant. This was evidence of consciousness. The small crowd that had gathered began to applaud. Strangers who understood they were witnessing something profound. A boy coming back from somewhere far away. A mother's desperate hope being answered. A music therapist's redemption. Riley finished the song and set down her guitar. She walked over to where Catherine sat beside Ethan. still holding his hand. Riley knelt down and spoke directly to him. She said, "Welcome back, Ethan." She said they had missed him. She said his mom had been here the whole time, waiting for him, loving him, refusing to give up. Catherine could not speak, could not form words through the sobs that shook her entire body. She pressed her forehead against her son's hand and cried 18 months of grief and hope and terror and love. And Ethan's fingers squeezed again, gentle, purposeful, a message from somewhere deep inside that said he heard her. He knew he was trying. The custody hearing 3 weeks later was almost anticlimactic. Catherine's attorney presented the video from the amphitheater. Dr. Chen testified about the documented progress. Riley explained her therapy approach with professional precision, acknowledging her past mistakes while demonstrating what she had learned. Marcus's attorney tried to argue that one moment of response did not prove anything, that Riley's methods were still unproven, that Ethan would be better served in a traditional facility. But the judge had watched the video, had seen Ethan's face, had heard the vocalization, had witnessed the undeniable evidence of consciousness. The judge ruled in Catherine's favor. Ethan would remain in her custody. Riley's therapy would continue with full medical oversight, and Marcus would be required to attend family therapy if he wanted to maintain his limited visitation rights. Walking out of the courthouse, Catherine felt lighter than she had in 18 months, not because the battle was over, but because she had chosen to fight it, had refused to let fear dictate her choices, had stood beside Riley and said, "This matters. This is worth fighting for. I believe in what we are building." Riley walked beside her, quiet and steady. Catherine took her hand. She said, "Thank you for everything. For seeing Ethan when everyone else saw a hopeless case, for showing up every evening despite past failures, for teaching Catherine that presence mattered more than control." Riley squeezed her hand. She said Catherine had given her something equally important, a second chance, the opportunity to use her skills to help someone, the gift of redemption. She said sometimes people came into your life not despite your brokenness, but because of it, because shared wounds created connections that could not exist any other way. Catherine thought about that, about the accident that had shattered her life, about Riley's mistake that had cost her everything, about how two women carrying impossible guilt had found each other and built something neither could have created alone. She said she used to think love meant protecting people from pain, controlling variables, preventing harm. But she had learned something different from Riley. She said love meant showing up in the midst of pain, sitting with uncertainty, choosing presence over protection, being willing to fail and try again anyway. Riley smiled. She said that sounded about right. 6 months later, Ethan opened his eyes. It happened during an afternoon session. Riley was playing a new piece she had composed specifically for him, something that blended jazz elements with classical structure. Catherine sat on one side of his bed. Sophie, Riley's daughter, sat on the other side, coloring quietly while the music played. Ethan's eyelids fluttered once, twice, then slowly, with visible effort, they opened. His gaze was unfocused at first, confused, but then his eyes found Catherine's face. Recognition flickered across his features. His lips moved soundlessly, trying to form words his body had forgotten how to speak. Catherine leaned close. She said it was okay. He did not have to talk yet. She said she was here. She had been here the whole time. She was not going anywhere. Ethan's hand moved to her face, touching her cheek with trembling fingers, confirming she was real, present, not a dream. Then his eyes shifted to Riley, who had stopped playing and sat frozen with wonder. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then, with tremendous effort, he whispered a single word. Music. Riley laughed through tears. She said yes. There would be lots more music, as much as he wanted, for as long as he needed. Ethan's eyes closed again, exhausted by the effort of consciousness, but his hand remained in Catherine's, holding on, present. The recovery after that was slow. Ethan had to relearn everything: how to speak, how to move, how to coordinate his body and mind. He had extensive physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. The road ahead was long and difficult, but he was awake. He was present. He was coming back. Riley continued her music therapy sessions, but they evolved. As Ethan regained function, she taught him to play simple instruments, hand drums, keyboard. Eventually, when his coordination improved enough, she brought in a saxophone, the same instrument he had loved before the accident. It took months before he could produce a single, clear note. But when he did, when that first pure tone rang out through the medical suite, everyone in the room cried. Ethan, Catherine, Riley, even Dr. Chen, who prided herself on professional detachment. Catherine's relationship with Riley deepened into something neither of them tried to define. More than friendship. Different from romance. A bond forged through crisis and sustained by mutual respect and shared purpose. They had dinner together every week, Catherine and Riley and their children. Ethan and Sophie became close friends, understanding each other in ways other kids could not. Both children of single mothers who had fought impossible battles. Both witnesses to what love looked like when it refused to give up. Catherine gradually reduced her hours at Monroe Tech. She promoted her VP to president and took on a role that required less constant presence. She said she had spent too many years prioritizing work over everything else. She said Ethan's accident had taught her that nothing mattered more than the people you loved and the time you spent with them. She learned to be present without cameras, to sit with uncertainty without trying to control outcomes, to trust that showing up was enough, even when you could not fix everything. Riley eventually opened a small private practice specializing in music therapy for brain injury patients. She kept her cleaning job one day a week. She said she never wanted to forget where pride and overconfidence could lead. She said humility was a practice, not a destination. 3 years after the accident, Ethan returned to school. He had deficits. His speech was slower. His coordination remained impaired. He tired easily and required ongoing therapy. But he was alive. He was learning. He was playing saxophone in the jazz band again, though not with the same proficiency he had before. He told Catherine he did not mind. He said the music sounded different now, deeper, more meaningful. He said he used to play notes. Now he played gratitude. On the 5-year anniversary of the accident, Catherine stood in the same amphitheater where Ethan had first vocalized. Riley had organized a small concert, former patients from her practice performing together, brain injury survivors who had found their way back through music. Ethan played saxophone. Sophie accompanied me on piano. Riley conducted, her face radiant with pride and joy. Catherine watched from the audience, surrounded by other families who had walked similar roads, people who understood that recovery was not about returning to who you were before. It was about discovering who you could become after everything fell apart. When the concert ended, Ethan found his mother in the crowd. He was 15 now, taller than her, his features showing the first hints of the man he was becoming. He hugged her tightly. He said thank you for not giving up on him, for fighting when everyone said to let go, for being there through every difficult day. Catherine held her son and thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, the one who watched life through cameras, who tried to control everything out of fear, who measured success by how much pain she could avoid. She had lost that woman in the wreckage of the accident, and she was grateful, because the woman she had become was stronger, more present, more connected to what actually mattered. She looked over Ethan's shoulder and saw Riley packing up equipment, laughing with Sophie about something. She saw the life they had built together, not the life she had planned, but something better, something earned through pain and patience and the stubborn refusal to stop trying. Riley caught her eye and smiled. Catherine smiled back. A whole conversation passing between them without words. "Thank you, I see you. We did this together. We built something beautiful from broken pieces." Outside the amphitheater, the city stretched toward evening. Millions of lives intersecting and diverging in patterns too complex to predict. People making mistakes and finding redemption, building walls and tearing them down. Learning that love was not about control. It was about presence, about courage, about showing up even when you had failed before. Catherine had watched her son through cameras for 18 months, afraid to be present for his pain, afraid that closeness would destroy her. But a janitor who sang to paralyzed boys had taught her something different. That presence was not about avoiding pain. It was about choosing to feel it, to sit with it, to let it transform you into something softer and stronger than you could have become alone. As they walked to the car, Ethan put his arm around his mother's shoulders. A reversal of the old dynamic. The child supports the parent. Both of them are learning to hold each other up. He said he had been thinking about something, about the 17 seconds that changed everything. He said he used to be angry about those seconds. Angry at his mother for looking away, angry at the universe for the timing, angry at everyone and everything. But he said he was not angry anymore, because those 17 seconds also brought Riley into their lives, brought Sophie, who was like the sister he never had, brought a whole community of people who understood suffering and healing in ways most people never would. He said he would not have chosen what happened, but he could choose what he did with it. He could choose gratitude over bitterness, connection over isolation, music over silence. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She said he was wiser at 15 than she had been at 41. Ethan laughed. He said he learned from the best, a mother who fought for him when the fight seemed impossible, a music therapist who saw him when no one else did, two women who refused to let their mistakes define their futures. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Catherine stood at her office window for the last time. She was moving her office next week, somewhere smaller, somewhere closer to ground level, somewhere without the fortress view that kept her separate from the world below. She thought about the woman who used to stand here, who watched everything through screens, who believed control could save her from grief. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone softer and stronger, someone who had learned that the cameras never told the whole story, that real life happened up close, where you could be hurt but also healed, where love was not about preventing pain but about choosing to feel it together. Someone who had been broken and rebuilt by a janitor who sang, who had found redemption not in avoiding mistakes but in learning from them, who had discovered that family was not something you controlled, but something you built through presence and patience and the courage to keep showing up even when success was not guaranteed. Catherine turned away from the window, away from the surveillance monitors and security feeds, away from the illusion that watching was the same as being there. She walked out of her office and did not look back. Downstairs, Riley was waiting in the lobby. They had plans to take the kids for ice cream, a simple, ordinary pleasure, the kind of moment Catherine used to miss because she was too busy managing crises and controlling outcomes. Now these moments were what she lived for: ice cream with people she loved, music in amphitheaters, her son's laughter, Riley's steady presence, the gift of second chances. They walked out into the Seattle evening, and Catherine did not reach for her phone to check the cameras, did not worry about what she was missing or what might go wrong. She was here, present, alive in her actual life rather than watching it from a distance, and that, she finally understood, was enough. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.